Calobra on Mallorca has to be one of cycling's most iconic climbs. It's right up there with things like Mont Ventoux and Alpe d'Huez. Cyclists from all over the world travel to Mallorca specifically to ride Calobra, and there's a lot of hype around it. Even I rode it myself about 18 months ago, so today I'm going to ask the question, is it really worth that hype? I first heard about Calobra back in 2003. I was out in Mallorca for my very first trip out there with my cycling club, and my friends were all telling me about this absolutely amazing, incredible climb that we all had to do. But by the time I'd ridden out there and had a look at it for myself, I found it so intimidating, I thought better of it and I didn't actually ride it. And I didn't ride it until 20 years later. Calobra itself, or to give it its official name, the Col de Rice, is actually 9.5 kilometers long with an average gradient of 7%. So it's already sounding pretty intimidating. But then if, like most cyclists, you're basing yourself in places like Alcudia or Port Pollença, it's a 50 kilometer ride to the top of Calobra, and you have to ride up 2 mountains to get there. But that's not all. Once you are at the top of Calobra, you've just got to ride down it, because there's only one road to the bottom of the climb. There are no other roads, no other ways to get there. And then you simply turn yourself around and ride back up to Calobra. And by the time you've got yourself back to your hotel, you've probably put in about 110 kilometers and you've climbed about 2,500 meters. So it's a pretty tough day out on the bike all round. And to be honest, I think that's one of the reasons why I personally never rode Calobra for over 20 years. But then about 18 months ago, in April 2023, I decided to bite the bullet, put my big boy cycling kit on and ride up Calobra once and for all. I was out there with some friends of mine, and another friend of mine, Oscar, who lives in Mallorca, has never or had never actually ridden up Calobra until that point. So we all decided to ride it together. Now I have to admit that we did kind of take the slightly easier option. We were staying in Alcudia, so we drove to the little cafe that's kind of at the base of the first climb up to the top of Calobra. So after some refreshments and a little bit of a pep talk, we got on our bikes and actually started the climb. And that little climb itself wasn't particularly easy, because it was about 2.5 kilometers long, with an average gradient of, I would say, between 6 and 7%. And that brought us to the very famous bridge and the viewpoint where you can see the road kind of just snaking away below you. And once we got there, there was nothing else for it but to do the long, very, very fast descent down to the little cafe at the very bottom of Calobra. And that descent itself took us about 20 minutes, and by the time I got to the bottom, my hands were aching from all the braking that I'd been doing on the bike on the way down. Once you get to the bottom of that descent, then you don't really have too many options, apart from maybe having a coffee or something. So all I did was turn around and started climbing back up straight away. And the moment I did, my cycling computer confirmed that the gradient was indeed 7%. And it just continued like that for another 9.5, 10 kilometers. There were occasions when the gradient did dip down as low as maybe 3%, but they were for very, very short sections, maybe 200 or 300 meters. And that was kind of enough for me to get my breath back a little bit. As I was doing the climb, I kind of did the maths in my head, and I knew that it was 9.5, 10 kilometers or so at 7%, and I was climbing at about 8 kilometers an hour. So I knew that it was going to take me about an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half to do the climb. As you can imagine, the scenery as you're doing the climb is absolutely stunning. You've got the pine-clad hills, you've got the road kind of snaking in front of you, you've got the Mediterranean, you've got the it just looks absolutely incredible. You've got cyclists coming down on the other side of the road, so you really feel like you're somewhere pretty special and pretty iconic in the cycling world. But unfortunately, you do also have cars, and at worst you have coaches coming down as well, which makes the road very, very narrow indeed. Whenever I talk about Sa Calobra with other cyclists, I get all kinds of different reactions. If I'm talking to the lighter, fitter, more racing style of cyclists, they'll say that it's not really that difficult. But then I suppose when you only weigh 65 or 70 kilos, a 7% gradient really isn't that big of a deal. Normally though, when I'm talking to other cyclists, they'll say that it's tough, but once you get yourself into a rhythm, you kind of get yourself through it. And again, that's precisely what I try to do on the climbs that I go up. Now, with Sa Calobra at 7%, I did find that a little bit difficult. And being a heavy rider, my cadence was down to about 60 to 70 revs per minute in my lowest gear. And all I could do was just chug my way up and hope that the pain ended soon. I managed to keep going for about 6.5 kilometers, but then after that, I started to feel progressively more tired. And the gradient also started to go up as well. I was in the section with the hairpins, and on the bends there, they were going up to about 9–10%, so they were particularly tough. And I had no choice but to just stop and take a couple of breathers. At one point, I made the mistake of looking up and thinking that I saw the finishing point, but what I was actually looking at was some roadworks that were going on, and I looked up even further and saw the real finishing point, and that really kind of demoralized me a little bit. So but I had no choice. I was there 3 kilometers or so from the top, and there was no other way that I was going to get myself there. So I had no choice but to get back on the bike, start pedaling, and just get myself to the top. Luckily for me, one of my friends came back down. I think he enjoyed the climb so much that he just wanted to do the last couple of kilometers all over again. But fortunately for me, that then meant that I had a wheel to follow. So I sat on his wheel for the next couple of kilometers, and we eventually got to that very famous bridge. But unfortunately, that is not the top of the climb. You think it is, but it isn't. You've still got about another 500–600 meters to go. And when you realize that, it becomes very demoralizing and very, very tough, because the road is still going up. And I have to say that that last little bit from the bridge to the actual sign, I found even tougher than the steeper bits down back on Sa Calobra itself. Once I actually passed that sign, I knew that I'd conquered Sa Calobra. It had taken me something like an hour and 25 minutes. I was absolutely exhausted, but at the same time, I was absolutely over the moon. I'd taken on this iconic climb that I'd avoided for like 20 years, and I'd beaten it. For the rest of that day, and indeed for the rest of that week, I was on quite a high. I kept on telling myself, I've finally ridden up Sa Calobra. I was really, really happy with myself. I didn't really care at all about how slow I'd ridden it. I think an hour and 25 minutes or so is pretty slow, but I had done it. I'd ridden all the way from the bottom to the very top, and I was very, very happy with myself. So I suppose the burning question has to be, is Sa Calobra really worth all the hype? And from my personal point of view, I have to say, yes, I think it is. It's this absolutely iconic, legendary climb that cyclists talk about all the time. And when you get there and see it for yourself in real life, it really does not disappoint. Even if you don't ride it, just standing at the top there, looking over the edge and seeing the road just twisting and turning underneath you is a really, really impressive sight. And then when you're descending it, you get an idea of how long and how steep it's going to be on the way up. And then, when you get to the bottom and you turn around and you start cycling up, you get to know firsthand that it is quite a tough climb, but it's absolutely incredible. It's an amazing ride. The scenery is incredible. You're pushing yourself to your limit, and when you get to the top, the feeling that you have is just something that you just cannot beat. I've been to Mallorca about 10 or 11 times. I've honestly lost count of how many times I've been out there. I don't have any plans to return in the immediate future, but I expect at some point I will return. When I do, the next big burning question has to be, will I consider riding up Calobra a second time? I'll be honest here and say that part of me would like to. I think I would like to try and beat my 1 hour and 25 minutes or whatever it was when I rode it the last time. But there's also a part of me that thinks, well, it's a tough ride. I've done it once. Do I really need to do it ever again? So there we go. If you'd like to get the most out of your cycling, then please consider signing up for my free monthly newsletter. I'll leave a link in the description below, and then all you need to do is go along and you can sign up. In the meantime though, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.